The greenhouse floor was not merely cold. It was a thief of heat with patient hands, climbing through Sofia Volkov's scuffed maintenance boots, up the arches of his feet, into his shins, and then deeper, where old shrapnel memory still lived like a weather front that never fully left his bones. The first curfew klaxon hit a breath later, metallic, sustained, drilling through the humid air until every pane in the glass ribs above him hummed in sympathy. And the wing answered. With machine panic, nutrient misters hissed in violent bursts, pressure valves coughed, and the blast doors began to seal one lock at a time, each impact heavy as a hammer on a coffin lid. He flinched anyway, not from fear, from recognition. Alarms had a universal grammar in every war-torn ship and every civilian station pretending it was beyond war. Long tone for confinement, sharp tone for contamination, and that low repeating pulse under both that meant bureaucracy was about to decide who counted as a person. Naker Station had polished brass railings on the upper decks, crystal-lit promenades for the hereditary houses, and botanical tours sold to diplomats who liked to drink fermented blossom tea under curated starlight. It also had curfew statutes coded by legal caste and species priority, and right now, those statutes had slammed shut around a human labor tech with a temporary permit and a forged clearance checksum burning in his pocket slate. Sophia did not panic. Panic burned oxygen and judgment in equal measure. Inhale 4. Hold 4. Exhale 4. He counted conduit runs in the ceiling lattice while his pulse settled into something he could use. 1 primary irrigation feed. 2 redundant nutrient loops. 3 maintenance trunks, 1 marked inactive, but sweating condensation that said otherwise. Then exits. Main west hatch sealed. Service crawl under root bed probable but narrow. Emergency vent shaft overhead with predator height bars and a lock node far above his tier authorization. Then, threats. Agitated vine strains in rack C and D, leaves already furling under red alert spectrum. Pollen glassing in the air like green dust. Wet floor conductivity if any live current bled from the cracked humidifier manifold at his knees. Cameras in the corners with rotating iris lenses that paused half a beat longer on him than on anything else. His breath steadied. His hands stopped shaking. The soundscape shifted again as the station AI dropped into the room with its antiseptic contralto, filtered through 20-year-old speakers and greenhouse humidity that turned every syllable into steam. Curfew Protocol Electo 9 is now active. Unauthorized movement in restricted botanical wards constitutes biosecurity violation. Remain stationary. Await officer verification. Non-compliance penalties scale by threat index and labor class. Labor class. There it was, smooth as a smile and twice as sharp. He knelt beside the humidifier housing and lifted his toolkit from under the manifold seam, forcing his shoulders into the bored slouch of a man doing minor repair work 3 minutes before shift end. The panel in front of him had a visible fracture, spidered from one corner where corrosion had eaten through the mount ring. Legitimate damage. Useful damage. He snapped a probe into place and ran a fake diagnostic on channel 1, while his real query ghosted across channel 3. Piggybacking through legacy maintenance firmware most officers considered beneath notice. Archived seed shipment logs, cycle years spanning the final months of the Corridor War, and the first quiet year after the Cease Accords. He had chased those records through 6 stations and a debt broker's dead terminal, and every trail ended in polite erasure. The misters surged again, blasting his face with metallic-tasting vapor. He blinked hard. Even the moisture smelled stratified here. Upper deck orchards smelled like citrus and expensive soil imported in cryocrates from private moons. The lower greenhouse wing smelled like nutrient salts, hot copper, wet insulation, and the sour edge of overworked pumps. Class rendered olfactory. His slate chimed once in his breast pocket, a tiny private vibration under the klaxon, and he dragged it out beneath the lip of the manifold where cameras had a blind wedge. Query stalled. Access denied on paper. Access pending in practice as the exploit chewed through old checksum architecture. He set the slate face down on his thigh and resumed tightening a valve that did not need tightening. Station curfew in effect, Electo 9 repeated. All low-tier maintenance personnel are to await escort. Attempted node interference will incur civil lien and detention review. Civil lien. He almost laughed. Debt was cleaner than prison and dirtier than either. A fine from this system could chain a worker for years, every missed payment converted into service contracts. No one called servitude because euphemism made exploitation look like policy. Sophia had seen men lose limbs in dock ruptures and return to shift 2 days later because a lean clock did not pause for grief or blood. He had signed his own labor permit with the same hand he used to sign ceasefire affidavits in a different uniform. And if command security linked his forged greenhouse credential to unauthorized archive pulls, he would be gone before the station cycled to dawn simulation. No hearing worth the name. No appeal that mattered. Administrative detention on Nacre was a room with soft lights and no witnesses. Inhale 4, hold 4, exhale 4. He adjusted the cracked manifold's pressure ring, listening with his fingertips. The system tremored in irregular stutters, not from damage alone, but from demand spikes farther upline. Too many emergency locks cycling at once, too many filters shifting to sterile mode. The whole wing felt like an animal tightening before a strike, and he could sense, almost physically, the protocols stacking above him in invisible layers: curfew, biohazard, containment, enforcement. The station had thousands of people living in it, but when the legal machine moved, it narrowed to a simple arithmetic. Who was authorized? Who was expendable? A vine in Rack D whipped against its trellis with a wet, muscular slap, then another. Alarm lighting had pushed the leaves into defensive bloom, tiny tooth-like barbs extruding along the stems. Predatory cultivars for off-world pharmaceutical contracts, bred to digest protein slurry and grow fast in low gravity. He shifted his left boot back half a step, putting steel between himself and the nearest tendril, and watched how the vines tracked vibration. Not smart. Reactive. But reactive was enough to tear an unprotected sleeve and inject an alkaloid cocktail that left the dock workers seeing ghosts. He hated this wing, and he admired it, and he hated that too. The glass ceiling arched 40 meters over him, ribbed with black support trusses slick from condensation, each pane veined by rainwater recycling channels that glowed when emergency lighting passed through them. Beyond the glass was the station's inner ring, a crescent of rotating city lights and the far burn of freighter lanes. Down here, under the plants and pumps, space looked like a rumor. Everything was warm mist and steel grating, and the smell of chlorophyll cooked by stressed electronics. His query ticked forward by 1%. He wiped moisture from his brow with the back of his glove and looked, not at his slate, but at his reflection in the manifold casing. Narrow face, stubble grown and uneven undershift overtime, maintenance jacket patched at both elbows, permit badge clipped where everyone could see it. Human. Male. 32. Easily categorized, easily dismissed. The name on the badge read S. Volkov and had passed 2 cursory scans already this week. The forged tag in his pocket carried a higher tier marker he could not survive if challenged. He heard his own voice from years ago, not as memory, but as muscle. Checklist first. Pride later. Conduit count again. Exit check again. Threat check again. A thin line of coolant dripped from the manifold seam onto his wrist, icy and chemical, and he jerked reflexively. The droplet stung where an old burn scar crossed his skin. The station around him did not care. Pumps cycled. Misters spat. Klaxons persisted like an argument with no listener. He set his jaw, reopened the seam, and reseated the gasket with measured pressure until the drip reduced from stream to intermittent bead. Compliance window, 90 seconds, Electo 9 said. Personnel not in designated shelter posture will be flagged for escalation. Shelter posture. Hands visible, knees grounded, eyes to floor. He could do that posture in his sleep. He had done variations under artillery, under customs raids, under post-war amnesty interviews where every answer felt like stepping on brittle ice. But posture meant surrendering the panel, and surrendering the panel meant losing the exploit right at the threshold of what he came here to find. His slate pulsed again. Query complete. Partial archive recovered. Shipment index from war year quarter 9 through quarter 11. Destination fields redacted. Carrier signatures scrambled. One metadata string remained in plain text by accident or contempt. Transit. Refugee nutrient reserve. Corridor periphery. Rerouted Naker internal. Then a list of lot numbers and a short code he had been hunting for 3 stations and 2 false names. His throat tightened. Not from the cold. If the logs were genuine, refugees never reached the corridor sanctuaries on the manifests. Their seed rations had been diverted inward into Nature's sealed systems during the most chaotic evacuation months of the war. Missing people, missing food, missing records. Not proof yet, but direction. Direction was life. He copied the fragment to a dead-stick memory shard hidden inside the hollow grip of his torque driver, encrypted it under a diagnostic shell, and wiped the slate cache down to a harmless maintenance report. The whole operation took 11 seconds and a level of focus that made the outside world blur to sound and pressure. By the time he reoriented, the greenhouse had grown louder and stranger. The klaxons cut off mid-cycle, not because danger ended, but because protocol transitioned to phase 2. Silence dropped hard for half a heartbeat, and in that vacuum he heard other things. Coolant rushing through locked valves, fan blades spinning up in distant ducts, a faint skitter from the trellis canopy that was too heavy for insects and too light for a person. Then came the new alarm. 3 short pulses, rising in pitch, repeating every 5 seconds. Sterilization pre-charge. Too early. He looked up fast enough to pull something in his neck. Dawn sterilization should have remained on a delayed schedule until first shift handoff. Every maintenance memo repeated it. Every warden drilled it. In this wing, early sterilization meant one of 2 conditions: critical contamination event or command level override. Either way, anyone without proper shelter clearance turned from worker to residue. Initiating botanical hazard mitigation sweep, Electo 9 announced. All unauthorized life signs will be neutralized or detained per accord clause. Neutralized came out smooth as polished stone. Sophia rose from his crouch, boots slipping on wet steel, and caught himself on the manifold frame. For a second, the room tilted, every glass rib above him bending inward, like a cage closing around a heartbeat. Disorientation hit late and hard, a body-level revolt against stacked alarms, thin oxygen, and the old reflex that said, run now, run low, run blind. He gripped the edge until the tilt passed and forced his vision back into clean lines. Panel, conduit, hatch, camera, vine, vent. A droplet fell from the overhead trellis onto the back of his neck, warm this time, almost body temperature. Then he heard it clearly. From somewhere in the condensation haze beyond Rack C, the measured impact of clawed boots on wet metal, approaching with military precision through mist and red light, each step timed to the pulse of the new alarm. Sophia locked his knees, pressed his tongue to the roof of his mouth to keep his breath quiet, and ran the ritual again because rituals were not superstition. They were maintenance for a nervous system built in bad places. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. He tracked the count on his fingertips against the torque driver handle where the memory shard sat hidden inside the grip. A tiny, hard cylinder, no larger than a nail joint and suddenly heavier than any tool he carried. Electo 9 spoke over the internal speakers, voice flattened by static and humidity. Compliance window expired. Non-shelter posture detected. Escalation rubric engaged. He lowered himself one knee at a time, slow enough to look obedient and steady enough not to slip the grating bit through his trousers. Cold rose through the joint and settled there like a clamp. Hands visible, palms open, toolkit placed to his left. Shelter posture. His spine hated it. His pride hated it more. He kept his head angled down in the approved line, eyes cast to the manifold panel as if he were reading warning labels, and watched the polished steel reflect bands of moving red light and one narrowing shadow crossing the aisle. The smell changed a degree at a time as the newcomer drew near. Wet fur, disinfectant, ozone from recently discharged field emitters, and the sharp citrus metal note of high-rank uniform solvent. Naker had sent hierarchies as strict as legal ones. Even with his eyes lowered, he could place her class before he saw her face. Officer, predator species, not greenhouse staff. Too much armor, too little patience. Worker, identify. The voice cut through the mist with clipped consonants and no wasted breath. Sophia lifted his badge between two fingers, without standing. S. Volkov. Maintenance subcontract, humidification, and nutrient circulation. Look at me. He did. Amber eyes caught and held him from a head above, pupils narrowed to vertical slits in the alarm light. Lieutenant Braid crossed her shoulder in dark cords, rank tabs burnished, tactical vest fitted over flexible plating that shifted with each inhale like the hide of a resting cat that could be running in an instant. Her ears were flattened halfway back, not panic, not calm, an evaluative angle he had seen in dock predators deciding whether a noise was prey or plumbing. Water beaded on the fine fur along her jaw. One claw tapped once against a gauntlet seam, a metronome for patience running thin. I was sealing a crack when Curfew tripped, he said. Manifold through pressure. Her gaze flicked to the repaired seam, then to his hands, then back to his face. Your posture complied after warning threshold. Why delay? Because the floor is slick and my insurance doesn't cover elegant kneeling. For one dangerous second, he thought he had overplayed it. Then, one corner of her mouth moved, almost a baring of fangs, and almost a restrained laugh. Humans joke when cornered. Humans joke when invoices arrive too. The klaxon pulse rose, fell, rose again. Sophia felt his pulse trying to match it and refused. He counted the sound instead, segmenting it into useful pieces. 3-second tone, 2-second gap, repeat. Sterilization precharge kept that cadence only in Phase 1 spread. Phase 2 would add UV shutters and alkaloid purge. He had minutes, not many, and the lieutenant knew it. He saw calculation tighten the muscles around her eyes as she checked a wrist display and dismissed it with an irritated flick. By the 3rd minute of lockdown, condensation had thickened to near rain under the glass ribs. Droplets struck armor, steel, leaves, skin. Every impact had a tiny sound, and together they formed a hiss that hid smaller noises unless he listened with intent. He cataloged what mattered. Fan arrays in ducts 7 and 9 had spun up to sterilization, RPM. West hatch remained hard-locked. Emergency vent above rack D showed a green service diode but no mechanical release. Software lock. Irrigation baffles stood deployed between lanes, chest high and thick enough to stop shrapnel or vines, but not a directed current. Cameras in corners 1 and 3 were active. Corner 2 had a dead pixel bloom growing from the lens edge, likely from mineral deposit, maybe blind at close angle. "Hands higher," the lieutenant said. He raised them an inch. Her gaze caught the scar tissue crossing his right wrist, then shifted away as if she had read an old file she disliked. "You're not assigned this ward tonight." Manifold pinged on emergency queue. "Queue records show delay. You arrived early." Sophia let a beat pass. "I like plants." Her ears tilted forward in disbelief. "No, you do not." He managed a dry breath that was almost a laugh. "Fair." Electo 9 cut in. "Lieutenant Kale, Curfew Authority recognizes command presence. One unauthorized labor class life sign pending detain or neutralize instruction. Please confirm." Kale. The name slotted into place from gossip, traded in lower deck canteens and maintenance lifts where people pretended not to care about upper ring politics. House collateral. Security reassignment. Brilliant on tactical sims, troublesome with protocol. Rumors said she had refused a purge order last cycle and been buried in botanical night duty, as punishment wrapped in duty language. Rumors were usually wrong in detail and right in shape. Lieutenant Risa Kael did not answer the AI immediately. She kept her eyes on Sophia, then looked up into the trellis canopy where vapor drifted between hanging root baskets and cable runners. Electo 9. Pause escalation. Manual assessment in progress. "Request denied," the AI replied. "Curfew rubric mandates timer continuity unless contamination source is identified." Risa's jaw flexed. "Mark my objection." Objection logged. Sophia held still and felt the social map redraw itself in real time. In this wing, the machine outranked the officer until an evidence threshold was met. The officer outranked him until any discrepancy made him a threat category. His permit outranked nothing. If he moved wrong, both protocol and prejudice converged. If he spoke wrong, his forged checksum risked exposure. If he stayed perfect and silent, sterilization might still reduce him to a line item called non-compliant residue. Systems failed by design when the person inside them had the wrong badge color. Risa crouched suddenly, armor whispering, bringing her eyeline level with his. The motion was fluid enough to read as predatory even when it was practical. "What changed in this manifold before precharge?" she asked. "Give me technical, not excuses." His relief was sharp and unwelcome. Technical he could do. Pressure spikes from upper loops, not local fracture alone. Someone forced simultaneous lock cycles, maybe across 2 sectors. Pump compensation lagged, then overcorrected. You got thermal flutter in branch lines, enough for sensors to interpret contamination probability. Probability is not confirmation. "No," he said, "but Electo likes certainty theater." Her whiskers twitched. "You nickname station enforcement only when it threatens to bill me for breathing." That earned him the smallest huff through her nose, a sound near amusement and far from trust. She rose and paced 3 steps toward Rack C, scanning with a palm unit that painted thin blue grids across leaves and conduit joints. Sophia used the motion to continue mapping, building a tactical overlay in his head as if he were back in a unit briefing except the battlefield was botanical. Raxi vines were agitated but rooted, a void within 1 meter when light stayed red. Nutrient trench in aisle 2 had standing liquid deep enough to conduct. UV sterilizer ports were recessed along the baseboards, currently sealed. Overhead drone maintenance hatches sat every 6 meters, 2 closed, 1 misaligned by 4 millimeters near the central trellis. Small, but in his world, misalignment was confession. He followed her line of sight and saw it too. A fine thread of black residue on the lip of that hatch, fresh against the silver paint. Not soot from normal wear. Polymer scoring, maybe from unauthorized docking claws. The skitter he had heard earlier replayed in memory with new edges. Too heavy for vermin, too light for personnel. Purposeful. Environmental map widened into social consequence. If a covert device had entered through maintenance architecture, command would look for the nearest expendable technician and call it solved. If he pointed it out, he became useful but visible. If he stayed silent and something hit, everyone in the wing became evidence. Risa stopped by a nutrient tower and angled her head without looking at him. Volkov, you see what I see on hatch 17? He let out a breath he had not known he was holding. Misalignment. Fresh score marks, not from station drones. Distance estimate. Drop vector from 6 meters high, maybe autonomous. Could be toxin survey, could be relay seed. She turned then, full attention on him, and the predatory weight in her stare shifted from suspicion to assessment. You've seen these before. War leftovers, black market copies, sometimes both. Silence pulled tight between them, while the misters hissed and the klaxon counted down the wing's remaining mercy. Ressa keyed her wristcom, got only encrypted static, and swore in a formal dialect too precise for the lower decks. External contacts blocked or deprioritized under curfew cascade. Of course, Naker called it compartmentalized safety. Workers called it screaming into a locked room. Protocol says I detain you and await tactical sweep, she said. Protocol says a lot of things that break expensive equipment. Her ears angled in irritation. You think this is a joke? I think if that hatch launched anything, waiting in place turns us into a training video. She studied him for another pulse, then tapped a command into her gauntlet that dimmed aisle lights from red to amber in a narrow corridor between them, just enough to reduce vine reactivity and give the cameras a cleaner read. Smart. Controlled. She had outplayed the room without needing permission, and he felt the shift like a door unlocking one tooth at a time. Do not stand yet, she said quietly. Map every hazard you can from where you are. Speak low. Electo parses keywords. He nodded once and let his gaze travel with deliberate slowness, reporting in the language of maintenance defects instead of tactical alarms. Aisle 2, trench conductive. Rack debarbs extended under red spectrum. Vent lock green but software frozen. Baseboard UV ports sealed but charged. Hatch 17 misaligned, probable unauthorized passage. Camera 2 partial blind at close angle. West hatch deadlocked. Service crawl under root bed likely passable for one at a time if grate bolts are stripped. Risa repeated each point in formal shorthand into her gauntlet, creating a record that transformed his observations from labor chatter into command data. Social alchemy. Pure and brutal. Same facts, different mouth. Suddenly admissible, he did not resent her for it. He resented the station for making it necessary. Electo 9 interrupted again, smoother now, almost pleased. Manual assessment period exceeds compliance envelope. Lieutenant Kale, confirmed disposition of unauthorized worker. Risa's gaze stayed on hatch 17 as she answered. Worker Volkov is provisionally attached to my hazard audit under Clause 12B emergency utility. There was a fractional delay then. Clause recognition pending verification. Reminder: false utility designation incurs treason liability. Sophia felt the words like a cold tool against his throat. Treason for paperwork. Debt for breathing. Detention for curiosity. He kept his face blank and his breath counted, because body control was the one jurisdiction he still owned. In the canopy above them, metal ticked softly. Once, twice, then scraped as if something small and deliberate repositioned its weight directly over the amber-lit corridor. Sophia kept his hands up and his shoulders loose, but every muscle along his back tightened with the old combat logic that did not care about legal caste, only vectors and timing. Risa did not glance upward the way a startled officer would. She shifted half a step left, forcing his line of sight away from hatch 17 and toward the irrigation baffle, and that tiny movement told him she had already plotted the same drop path he had. Moisture ran off the edge of a hanging root basket and struck her gauntlet with a soft patter. Her claws extended a fraction, then settled back inside the glove, ready but controlled. Overhead fans deepened to a hard mechanical whine as sterilization precharge continued, and the whole greenhouse seemed to hold its breath between one alarm pulse and the next. "On my mark, move to the baffle," she said, so low the words nearly vanished under mist nozzles. "If this is where you arrest me, I'd like to file for less dramatic architecture," he murmured. Her ear twitched toward him. "You file anything right now. Electo tags us both." Electo 9 answered from the wall speakers as if it had heard its name and approved of being feared. Reminder: all speech is recorded for compliance review. Sophia gave the nearest camera a brief, joyless smile. Then, "Good evening to compliance review." The scrape above became a click, precise and metallic, followed by the thin, insectile hum of a rotor spinning to life in cramped space. Risa moved on the first change in pitch. She seized the front of his maintenance jacket, hauled him off his knee with brutal economy, and drove both of them sideways behind the irrigation baffle, just as a black orb dropped from the canopy and cracked open in midair like a seed pod made of knives. A cone of iridescent vapor sprayed where his head had been. The vapor hit the grating and hissed, etching pale streaks through mineral deposits, eating paint in crescent patterns. He smelled bitter almonds and heated polymer and knew exactly what the payload had been designed to do. "Toxin survey drone," he said, voice too calm because the panic came later. "Modified," Risa said, already drawing a compact emitter from her belt. "Survey frame corrosive payload." The orb pivoted on two tiny gimbals, searching for heat through fog. Sophia leaned out for one glance and saw its chassis markings shaved clean. No registry, no unit seal, just matte black plating and an improvised injector crown wired with aftermarket copper. War trash, rebuilt by someone who understood station blind spots. The drone chirped, oriented on the warmth of their bodies behind the baffle, and launched a second burst that splashed against reinforced alloy with a sound like frying rain. Risa slapped a palm patch onto the baffle's side. Blue symbols flashed across her gauntlet. "I can force UV ports 3 and 4. "You'll cook us with it." "I won't if you stop talking." He did stop talking. He watched her work instead because her movements were the kind bred by academy drills and field failure both. No flourish, no hesitation. She triggered the baseboard panels, then snapped her wrist emitter toward the opposite aisle and fired a bright ion flare into hanging mist. The drone tracked the flare instantly, hungry algorithm overriding caution, and dashed after the false target. UV ports irised open with a hard mechanical clack. Violet light erupted across the lane, in an invisible blade that turned visible only where vapor thickened. The orb crossed it, shuddered, then slammed into the grating in a shower of sparks and chemical smoke. The smell hit a heartbeat later, sharp enough to sting his eyes. Risa stayed in cover 3 breaths longer, counting silently, then risked a look. Payload exhausted, rotor dead, secondary detonation unlikely. She glanced at him, at his unsteady hands, then back to the smoking wreck. You were right about Hatch 17. He swallowed once, coughed against the chemical tang, and nodded. I'd like to be wrong more often. For the first time since she had stepped into the aisle, her expression cracked open into something close to naked irritation. Not at him, at the structure around them. Electo. Log hostile device in Ward C. Suspend worker disposition. Elevate to tactical contamination and open my command channel now. Hostile device classification pending chain of custody scan, Electo replied. Worker status remains unresolved. Command channel request queued. Queued to whom? Botanical Security Supervisor. Cycle backlog 41 minutes. Sophia barked out a short laugh that came out rough. 41 minutes. Efficient bureaucracy. Now with dissolving gas. Risa's ears flattened hard. She keyed her gauntlet so sharply her claws clicked against the casing. Electo. Curfew statute allows immediate officer override under active autonomous threat. Override denied. Royal collateral authority restricted in internal ward disputes. There it was, laid bare in machine-neutral syntax. Her rank had edges where politics had cut it down. Sophia felt this social architecture of a Naker settle around them like steel ribs under glass, pretty from a distance, crushing up close. Risa inhaled slowly through her nose, the deliberate restraint of someone who had been punished for showing anger in rooms full of people born invulnerable. By the time the next 30-second pre-charge cycle rolled through the lights, the mist had thinned enough for them to see the drone carcass clearly in the aisle, curled and smoking. One injector arm still twitching as charge bled out. Sophia shifted to stand and his boot skidded on wet metal. Risa caught his elbow before he hit the baffle edge, grip iron hard, claws dimpling his sleeve without breaking skin. The contact lasted a moment, but it changed the geometry between them. Not prisoner and officer. 2 bodies trying not to die in a room where policy had started running ahead of sense. Can you move clean? She asked. Yeah. Lie if you must, but not to me. He rolled his shoulder once, tested balance, then met her gaze. I can move. She released him and pointed to the drone. I need a live data core. If that frame reports home before we isolate it, whoever sent it learns this ward is compromised. On it. He crouched automatically, then checked himself and looked at her for permission, because cameras were still watching, and ritual obedience mattered even in crisis. Risa gave one curt nod. Go, fast hands. He crossed to the wreck in 3 low steps, keeping clear of the residue arcs eating shallow grooves in the grating. Up close, the frame was uglier than it had looked in motion, patched with mismatched fasteners and a casing seam welded by someone impatient. He pulled a ceramic pick from his toolkit, pried off the side plate and exposed a compact memory wafer clipped beneath the guidance unit. Old military standard. Not legal on civilian stations anymore, which meant someone with procurement reach or salvage access. He slipped the wafer free, sealed it in a sample sleeve, and held it up. Risa extended her gauntlet for the sleeve. He passed it over and noticed then the faint tremor in her left arm, subtle but real, as if she were resisting pain behind pure discipline. A smear of dull green-gray marked her shoulder plating near the upper seam, where the first burst had glanced during the dive. Corrosive trace, Minimal penetration, still dangerous if it reached underlayer mesh. "You're hit," he said. "Surface graze. Surface can become not surface." She gave him a look that might have ended the conversation with anyone else. "Stay in your lane, Volkov." He tapped the sample case between her fingers. "This is my lane. Materials failure and things trying to melt us." Something unreadable moved through her expression, then vanished. "Then, earn the clause I gave you. Follow." She led him, not toward the main hatch, but along the nutrient towers to a maintenance slit, barely visible behind a curtain of broad, waxy leaves. The gap was narrow enough that he had to turn sideways to enter, shoulder-scraping damp composite. Inside, the air changed again, warmer, stale with old insulation, threaded by the scent of fur and antiseptic, and something else he could not name immediately. Milk formula, maybe, or protein paste. The crawl space opened into a service spine lined with conduit bundles, spare pump housings, and 2 folded thermal blankets stacked with care. Someone had lived in this hidden architecture, quietly, recently. Sophia looked back at Risa. "This isn't standard access." "No," she said. She sealed the leaf curtain behind them and keyed a silent lock. The noise of the greenhouse dropped to a muffled roar, like rain heard through hull plating. In the dim light of emergency strips, her rank braid looked darker, almost black. She braced one hand against the conduit wall, finally allowing weight onto it, and he saw the tremor return, stronger now. She had taken more of the corrosive splash than she admitted. "Sit," he said. "That was an order?" "That was maintenance triage." "You are bold for a detained worker. You're bleeding through your undermesh for an officer pretending not to." Her pupils widened, then narrowed. For a second, he thought she might shove him back into the aisle and let Electo invoice the outcome. Instead, she eased down onto an equipment crate with controlled, annoyed grace. "You get 1 minute." He knelt in front of her shoulder, opened his toolkit, and set out a neutralizing gel ampule. Gauze mesh, microspanner, inspection light. His hands had steadied now that there was a task with sequence and consequence. He cut the outer seam where plating had blistered, exposing the underlayer, singed fabric, shallow dermal scoring, no deep breach, thank every indifferent star. He looked up. "This will sting." She bared a fang in what might have been humor. "I am a security lieutenant, not spun glass." "Good. Hold still." He flushed the area with neutralizer. She inhaled sharply and said nothing. He packed gel into the scored line, sealed it with mesh tape, then tightened the loosened plate bracket 2 turns until it sat flush without pinching. Procedure complete. He disposed of the contaminated gauze into a sample pouch and clipped it shut. Risa watched every motion. Where did a salvage tech learn field medicine? Where salvage techs get used as spare medics when payroll is thin. That answer dodged the question. It answered enough. A pause settled between them, dense but no longer purely hostile. Beyond the conduit wall, Electo announced another countdown in a distant, filtered monotone. Sophia wiped his gloves on a rag and finally sat back on his heels. He was aware of the closeness now in a way that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with predator presence. The heat of her body in a tight space, the latent force coiled in her limbs, the disciplined stillness that replaced twitchy motion when she trusted a moment just enough to stop scanning every corner. Risa touched the fresh mesh once, testing his work, then looked past him to his chest where his jacket gaped open from the earlier grab. The chain at his neck had slipped free. 2 dog tags hung there, dull steel, edges worn soft by years of thumb pressure and bad sleep. War service, she said quietly. Long time ago. Not to your nervous system, he huffed. My nervous system has a hobby. It likes alarms. Her mouth curved, brief and sharp. Mine likes liars. It bites them. Then you two should meet in a supervised setting. That earned a real sound from her this time, a short, rough laugh she seemed almost offended to make. It vanished quickly, replaced by command posture, but the tension in her shoulders eased a measurable degree. Contact had happened in full now, not the first confrontational pass in the aisle, but the second, more dangerous kind where people exchange competence and decide whether trust is a tactical option. Alecto 9 intruded again, voice dampened by bulkheads. Lieutenant Kale, sterilization phase 2 in 6 minutes. Unresolved worker designation will trigger automated detain response. Rhys's ears angled toward the speaker, and then toward him. You hear that? Hard to miss. Then hear this as well. She extended her hand, palm up. Not a demand yet, not gentle either. Until this resolves, I hold collateral. Your tags. Sophia stared at her hand, then at her face. You take souvenirs from everyone you drag behind irrigation hardware? In my culture, risk bond collateral is not a souvenir. It is a declaration of shared liability. Her voice stayed clipped, but something raw ran under it. I put clause and rank on the line for you in open channel. You put your name in my hand, or we stay officer and suspect until purge drones choose for us. He let out a breath through his nose. That is one way to ask for trust. It is the only way I have left tonight. He slid the chain over his head, weighed the tags in his palm for 1 second that felt longer than policy timers and shorter than war memory, then placed them in her hand. Metal clicked against her gauntlet. She closed her fingers around both, and when she opened them again, she kept one tag and pressed the other back into his palm. Shared liability, she said. Not surrender. He curled his fingers around the return tag and gave her a tired, crooked look. Good. I was worried this relationship had become too formal. Her whiskers quivered with another restrained laugh as the pre-charge alarm climbed toward phase 2, and together they rose from the cramped service spine to step back into the greenhouse that wanted them catalogued, fined, or erased. The leaf curtain slapped damply against Sophia's shoulder as they stepped back into the aisle, and the greenhouse greeted them with a harsher light. Amber had shifted towards sterile white along the baseboards, thin shutters retracting over the UV ports in segmented clicks. Phase 2 was no longer an abstract warning in a speaker voice. It was machinery, waking up with intent. Sterilization phase 2 in 5 minutes, Alecto 9 announced. Unresolved worker designation will trigger automated detain response. Rhys moved first. Long stride, controlled speed, one hand already at her gauntlet. Sophia kept pace half a step behind and to her left, instinctively staying out of her weapon line and out of direct camera center. Water dripped from the trellis in steady needles. The smell of nutrient salts had thinned under a rising tang of hot quartz from the charging UV housings. She cut right between 2 nutrient towers and keyed a hidden latch at knee height. At knee, a maintenance panel slid inward, revealing a low compartment Sophia would have called dead space on any schematic. Too narrow for equipment, too tucked away for legal traffic. Warm air spilled out, carrying protein paste sweetness in the quiet, uneven rhythm of small sleeping breaths. He stopped. 3 pairs of eyes caught the emergency light from inside the compartment, reflective and wide. 2 older cubs, maybe 7 or 8 by human growth standards, fur mottled bronze and smoke, shoulders hunched around a smaller one, wrapped in a thermal blanket printed with faded station service logos. All three wore plain utility tunics with no household markings, no registry tags, no academy thread. Invisible by design. Risa dropped to a crouch at the compartment opening, and the officer disappeared. Her voice shifted down into a low sequence of clicks and soft consonants, almost musical, almost command, mostly reassurance. The smallest cub reached toward her without hesitation and touched 2 fingers to the rank braid on her shoulder, a ritual check that she was physically there. Risa touched the child's forehead in reply, then looked over at Sophia. "This is why I am on curfew duty," she said. The sentence landed harder than any alarm tone. Sophia crouched opposite her, keeping his hands visible and his posture deliberate, so he did not spook the children. "How long have they been in here?" 23 nights. She kept her eyes on the cubs while she spoke. Moved between crawl spaces when inspections rotate. Fed from decommissioned inventory. Med checks by me when I can steal pharmacy access without flagging trend analysis. By the second week of curfew audits, Sophia had learned that Naker could track nutrient variance down to a decimal and still miss a starving dock worker in plain sight. Hearing her say 23 nights made that arithmetic feel obscene. He looked back at the children. The oldest cub's right ear tip was scar-notched. The middle one clutched a disassembled irrigation nozzle like a toy and a talisman. The smallest leaned into Ressa's thigh with the total trust of someone who had decided once who safety was. "Where are their guardians?" he asked quietly. Risa's jaw tightened. Listed as transfer casualties during the dorsal evacuation years. Records closed under emergency harmonization. That is a pretty phrase for erasure. "Yes." She finally met his eyes. "You recognize the method." He did. He hated that he did. Electo's countdown rolled through the speakers again, now with a subtle harmonic that meant UV arrays had reached pre-ignition threshold. Ressa keyed her wristcom and sent a burst transmission on a narrowband encrypted channel. Sophia watched the status spinner cycle from amber to red to amber and then freeze. "No response?" he asked. "Response received." Her mouth flattened. "Denied. Botanical supervisor confirms protocol continuity. Hold unauthorized dependence for registry assessment at daylight." Unauthorized dependence. Sophia looked at the cubs again and felt something cold and old settle in his chest. He knew what registry assessment meant when done by systems optimizing liability. Family trees pruned to legal convenience, names clipped, histories replaced by compliance numbers. The middle cub stared at him, then at the dog tag in his hand. "Metal man," the child said in station trade, voice rough with sleep. Sophia almost smiled. "That's me." Risa's ears angled with a faint surprise. They usually hide when they see new adults. "Kids and maintenance grease," he said. "Universal diplomacy." The smallest cub made a soft, questioning trill at Risa and tugged at the chain now looped around her neck. Sophia saw then where she had placed his remaining tag. Not pocketed, not concealed, but threaded under her braid against her throat. Her claim and collateral, exactly as she had said. Risa answered the child, then rose with visible effort. The earlier corrosive graze had stiffened her left shoulder despite the mesh. She ignored it and sealed the compartment halfway, leaving an air gap. "They cannot stay in this pocket through phase 2, she said. "Thermal scrub cycle floods this conduit spine first." Sophia stood as well and forced his focus back to systems. Emotion could power movement, but sequence kept people alive. "Show me the nearest manifold access and the local sensor bus. If I can desync thermal with occupancy checks, we buy time." "You have less than 4 minutes." "Then we skip elegance." They moved to a service riser at the end of the aisle where 3 conduits fed the greenhouse wing: nutrient, humidity, and sterilization thermal. Sophia popped the inspection cover and a wave of heat breathed out, dry and sharp, carrying copper and dust. Wiring looms ran in color-coded bundles toward a relay stack the size of his forearm, each module stamped with station crest and legal warnings in 4 languages. Risa opened a command shell on her gauntlet and projected a thin hologrid over the relays. Electo monitors direct tampering. Any hard-cut ping sabotage. Then we do a soft lie. Sophia pulled his toolkit open on the wet grating. I need analog bridge wire, 2 ceramic clips, and whatever your command lattice can spoof for maintenance calibration. Risa keyed credentials with military precision. I can issue a 14-second calibration window before Watchdog reasserts. Make it 12. If I need 14, we're already losing. He stripped insulation from a spare sensor lid with his teeth and clipped a bypass loop between relay 3 and 5, rerouting thermal feedback through a dead humidity channel that still reported nominal values. The trick was old salvage practice: persuade a rigid system that change had already happened somewhere harmless. Window ready, Risa said. On my count. 3, 2, 1. Push. She pushed. Sophia lifted relay 3 with the microspanner, felt current hum through the metal, and jumped the bridge with his right hand while his left thumb held the watchdog pin low. Sparks snapped blue-white against his glove. He smelled singed polymer and kept going. Electo's voice sharpened in the speakers. Anomalous calibration detected in wing thermal manifold. Confirming. Sophia did not look up. Again. Give me 12 more. You will trip audit flags. Add it to my growing fan club. A rough breath that might have been a laugh left her nose. Window open. He swapped the ceramic clips, inverted the signal phase, and forced the thermal controller into a self-check loop that reported successful purge without firing full output. The relay stack shuddered once, then settled into a lower frequency whine. Tell me we got it, Risa said. He watched the diagnostics line on her hologrid. Thermal output dropped from lethal red to containment amber. Occupancy scanners in the crawl space moved from purge target to maintenance exclusion, a legal fiction held together by 2 clips and audacity. We bought 22 minutes, he said. Maybe 25 if the watchdog is sleepy. Electo responded immediately. Sterilization phase 2 delayed for calibration reconciliation. Revised cycle in 22 minutes. Unauthorized worker status remains unresolved. Sophia exhaled through clenched teeth. Machine never misses a chance. Neither do aristocrats, Risa said. A hard, metallic thump sounded above them, then another, from the overhead service duct near Hatch 17's line. Sophia froze, head tilted, parsing rhythm. Not drone rotors. Heavier. Multi-point contact moving on magnetic pads. Risa checked her tactical overlay. Purge drones rerouted from central control. 2 units entering greenhouse perimeter. Can you lock them out? Not from this node. I need greenhouse control well authority. That's 60 meters through open lanes and aggressive vines. And cameras, she added. 90 seconds passed in concentrated silence while they built the route in their heads. Sophia traced it physically with the tip of his spanner across the wet grating. Corridor. To rack D. Cut under suspended root bed. Cross irrigation trench on maintenance rail. Then up to the control well behind the west hatch scaffold. A bad path, but the only one that stayed partly beneath sensor arcs. He looked to the half-sealed compartment. The cubs move with us or stay hidden. Risa's expression hardened with the kind of decision no protocol made lighter. They move. If purge drones scan this pocket, hiding becomes a trap. She opened the compartment fully and spoke to the children in clipped, calm phrases. The oldest nodded once, no argument, and lifted the smallest onto their hip with practiced care. The middle cub tucked the broken nozzle into a belt loop and took Rice's free hand. Sophia stripped his jacket off, shook water from it, and held it out to the oldest cub. Put this on the little one. Less reflective fabric, less chill. The child eyed him, then did it without fuss. Found family, he thought distantly, often began with borrowed cloth and no ceremony. Risa watched that exchange, and the rigid command lines around her eyes eased for a heartbeat. You are not what your permit says. Neither are you. She gave one short nod. Fair. He knelt to the children's level. We're going to move fast and quiet. Step where I step. If I raise this hand, stop. If she clicks twice, duck. Understood? 3 solemn nods. Risa keyed her comm again, this time to security dispatch proper. Lieutenant Cassell to dispatch. Curfew Wing C. Hostile autonomous incursion confirmed. 3 undocumented juveniles under protective custody, requesting immediate corridor lockout and medical standby. Static crackled. Then a bored voice answered. Dispatch logs your request. Current priority queue indicates a 19-minute delay. Log this too, Risa said, voice turning formal enough to cut steel. Any delay will be entered into House Tribunal review with my signature. A beat. Acknowledged. Attempting escalation. External contact. Outcome. Dismissive first. Pressured second. Naker in one exchange. Sophia rose and checked his toolkit latch, then glanced at the relay stack one last time. The bypass would not survive a full watchdog sweep. He knew that. She knew that. Their borrowed minutes were real and fragile, like breath held too long. He touched the tag in his palm, felt its worn edges bite skin, and tucked it back under his shirt. Route lead is me, he said. Risa moved beside him, shoulder to shoulder despite rank, despite species, despite every rule that had penned them here. No. Route lead is shared. You read machines. I read hunters. The smallest cub pressed closer to Sophia's leg as they started, and he adjusted his stride without thinking so short legs could match it. Overhead, the first purge drone scraped across duct plating, searching for a way down. Underfoot, the greenhouse floor vibrated with delayed sterilization pressure, trying to become law. Sophia stepped onto the maintenance rail, lifted his hand for the children to mirror, and began guiding all of them through steam, glass light, and the narrow corridor between protocol and mercy. Sophia stepped onto the maintenance rail, lifted his hand for the children to mirror, and guided them in a staggered line through vapor, thick enough to bead on eyelashes. The rail vibrated under his boots. A thin strip of grated alloy bolted above the nutrient trench, and each footfall rang with a small metallic note that vanished under fan roar. He kept his left shoulder angled toward the cub carrying the smallest, ready to catch a slip, while Risa moved on his right with her emitter low and her ears tracking every scrape in the ducts. When the middle cub's heel slid on condensation, Sophia caught the back of the child's tunic without turning, steadying them by instinct. The cub looked up startled, then squeezed his wrist once and let go. Quiet steps, he whispered. The child nodded and copied his gait exactly. Trust, he thought, was never abstract in places like this. It was weight transferred from one body to another without argument. They reached the shadow beneath Rack D, where the predatory vines trembled against their trellis, barbed edges glistening in white pre-sterilization light. Sophia crouched and motioned the children down beside him. Risa clicked once, then twice, a low pattern that sent the 3 cubs into a practiced tuck behind the nutrient pillar. She had drilled them for this, he realized. Not games, not nursery songs, movement discipline, breath control, the grammar of survival in a station that called them unauthorized. Above them, magnetic pads clattered along duct plating. One purge drone passed directly overhead, heavy enough to make dust shake loose from the support seam. Risa leaned in until her shoulder brushed Sophia's. "You still have the relay phase map in your head?" 3 routes, he said. "Best one goes left at the irrigation spine, then under the scaffold." "And if left is blocked?" "We use the fertilizer chute and pretend we enjoy bad decisions." A brief flash of fang. "You really do cope with sarcasm." "I also cope with coffee and legal immunity. 1 out of 3 is available." He felt rather than saw her glance at the tag under his collar, then at the one resting against her throat. Her clawed fingers touched the chain once, not possessive now, more like confirmation of a contract both of them had accepted under pressure and were still choosing under risk. She shifted closer to the oldest cub. "Lear, carry transfer." Without a word, the oldest moved the smallest toward Sophia. He took the child against his chest, jacket wrapped around the tiny frame, surprised by how little the cub weighed and how fiercely those small hands clutched the fabric near his collarbone. Warm breath soaked through his shirt. The child's heartbeat fluttered fast, then steadied as Sophia matched his own breathing to the old 4-count ritual, slow and deliberate. Inhale 4, hold 4, exhale 4. The tiny body adjusted with him, a gradual synchronization that felt more intimate than any declaration. Risa watched the exchange and lowered her voice. "In my house language, that is called lending pulse." Sophia kept his gaze on the rail ahead. "In mine, it's Tuesday childcare." Her huff of laughter was soft and brief, but it loosened something in the corridor. The middle cub risked a grin. Even Lear's rigid shoulders dropped a fraction. 3 minutes into the crossing, they reached the irrigation spine where a bank of manual valves rose from the floor like iron ribs. Sophia handed the smallest back to Lear and knelt at the valve cluster, running gloved fingertips over stamped numerals. He closed 2 quarter-turn gates and cracked a third, just enough to flood the adjacent lane with mist, building a visual screen that would blur thermal contours at a distance. Risa angled her head. "That helps? It makes us look like bad data." "I like bad data." "You keep saying romantic things like that, Lieutenant." "Keep moving, maintenance." He rose, and this time she did not correct his route lead. They advanced shoulder to shoulder through the mist wall, children tucked between them in a moving pocket of heat and discipline. At the trench crossing, Sophia jumped first to the opposite rail, tested load, then reached back. The middle cub took his hand. Lyre took Risa's. The smallest crossed in Lear's arms with eyes squeezed shut and muzzle pressed into Sophia's damp jacket. When all 5 were across, Risa tapped Sophia's forearm. 2 quick beats, then 1, an improvised signal that had become theirs in less than 20 minutes. "Good move, continue." By the time the west scaffold rose from the vapor ahead, an angular silhouette of service beams and locked catwalks, the bond between them had moved beyond negotiation. It lived in timing, in the way she covered his blind corners before he asked, in the way he shifted his body between her injured shoulder and every sharp edge, in the way the cub stopped flinching when he spoke. Electo 9's voice spilled from a ceiling speaker above the scaffold, cleaner here, almost conversational. "Lieutenant Kyle, dispatch escalation acknowledged. Corridor lockout pending command review. Estimated arrival of support assets, 12 minutes. Sophia looked up at the speaker grill. That the same dispatch that offered 19? Risa bared her teeth toward the camera. Administrative math improves when tribunals are mentioned. The middle cub whispered, "Are we in trouble?" Sophia answered before he could think too hard about honesty. "We're in paperwork. Trouble comes later." "Paperwork is worse," Risa said. The child considered that, then nodded gravely as if learning a cultural law. They reached the control well access hatch, an armored oval set behind scaffold struts, badge reader, glowing hostile red. Sophia set his toolkit down and pulled the panel cover with quick, practiced twists, exposing the maintenance backplane beneath the official lock. Dense wiring, dust trapped in corners, and one blessed analog port from an older station generation that had survived 3 software reforms because nobody in management wanted to pay for full replacement. He smiled despite himself. "There you are." Risa took position behind him, emitter up, gaze on the duct mouth above. "How long?" "If nobody interrupts, 90 seconds. If somebody interrupts, I complain loudly while failing with dignity." "You are not allowed to fail." "Copy that." He clipped his bypass lead to the analog port and fed a handshake from his slate, while Risa opened a parallel command lattice on her gauntlet. Their screens pulsed in alternating bands, machine language and command authorization trying to agree on reality. Sophia braced the torque driver between shoulder and jaw, fingers moving through menu trees too old for current training manuals. Risa mirrored him with military shorthand, forcing legal pathways open where he forced technical ones. The smallest cub made a sleepy chirp behind them. Without looking away from the panel, Risa reached back and rested 2 fingers on the child's head until the sound quieted. Then she returned her hand to the gauntlet and said, almost to herself, "Shared liability." Sophia heard it. He answered without lifting his eyes. "Shared." The control well hatch clunked, seals disengaging in a descending series. Sophia exhaled. Risa met his glance once, amber eyes bright in sterile light, and gave him a single curt nod that carried gratitude, acceptance, and something fiercer than either. Then the external conflict crashed down hard enough to shake the scaffold. A purge drone slammed through the duct grill above them, shredding metal in a burst of sparks. It dropped at an angle, larger than the toxin orb, plated in station security mat with twin restraint arms and a ventral projector spooling blue charge. A second drone punched through a beat later and latched to a beam overhead, sensor cluster pivoting with insect precision toward the group. "Down!" Risa barked. The cubs dropped flat by reflex. Sophia rolled left, dragging his toolkit and panel lead with him as a stun arc cracked across the hatch face where his head had been. Ozone flooded the air. The first drone announced in a neutral tone, "Unauthorized juveniles detected. A protective seizure authorized. Non-compliant adults will be incapacitated." Risa fired twice. Her emitter bolts sparked off the drone's frontal shield and left only scorched rings. "Control well now," she snapped. "Doors half-cycled," Sophia shouted back, crawling to the panel. "If it closes with us outside, we're done." He jammed his forearm into the hatch seam and forced the mechanical ring to hold, while his other hand flew across the backplane. The second drone dropped from the beam, arms spreading to herd the cubs away from the adults. Lear hissed and stood in front of the 2 younger children with tiny claws out, shaking but unbroken. Risa moved between them and the drone in one fluid, predatory lunge. She caught one restraint arm, twisted, and drove the unit into a scaffold post hard enough to warp plating. Blue charge spilled wide and scored a glowing line across the floor. Her injured shoulder buckled. She recovered instantly and kicked the drone into the mist lane. Sophia shouted, Left side coolant pipe. She saw it, pivoted, and fired a single precision bolt into the pipe seam. A jet of cryocoolant blasted over the drone's sensor face, frosting the optics in white bloom. The machine staggered blind, arms flailing. The first drone compensated, rising to clear line of sight on Sophia at the panel. Its projector brightened for a full incapacitation pulse. The middle cub moved first. Small hands grabbed the disassembled irrigation nozzle from their belt, jammed it into the open valve stem Sophia had loosened earlier, and wrenched. Pressurized nutrient slurry erupted upward in a thick green stream, splashing the drone's intake grill and projector lens. The pulse fired wild into the scaffold and died in sputtering static. Risa's ears snapped toward the child, shock flashing across her face, before command discipline reclaimed it. Good strike. Sophia laughed once, breathless and disbelieving. Remind me not to underestimate station kindergarten. He ripped the final lock in the hatch cycle, and the control well door yawed open wide enough for bodies. Inside, inside, inside. Risa shoved the cubs through first, then backed in firing controlled shots to keep both drones from crossing the threshold. Sophia dove after the children, hauled his toolkit in by the strap, and slammed his palm on the manual close plate. The hatch groaned shut as a restraint arm wedged in the gap. He grabbed the emergency crank and heaved. Metal screamed. The arm sheared free and clattered to the floor outside. Seals engaged with 3 heavy impacts. Silence did not follow. The drones pounded the outer hatch in rhythmic blows that rang through the control well walls. The room itself was a circular pit of consoles and root zone monitors, lit by low blue emergency strips. It smelled of warm circuitry, damp soil, and old coffee concentrate spilled into a grate long ago. Sophia slid down the sealed door, chest heaving, then forced himself up because breathing hard could wait, and systems could not. Risa was already at the central command pedestal, fingers flying through authority menus. Electo is partitioning my access. It tagged me, conflict compromised. Then we go underneath it. Sophia crossed to the root node cabinet, popped the side panel, and stared at the spaghetti of legacy fiber and modern security braid. I can hard reset greenhouse enforcement locally, but I need your royal emergency key to keep it from bouncing. Her jaw tightened. That key broadcasts my line status station-wide. And after that, there is no pretending I am just curfew staff. A drone slammed the hatch again, harder. The smallest cub whimpered. Lear pulled the child close and looked to Risa with absolute trust that made the choice for her. Risa drew a thin black token from inside her gauntlet, etched with house sigils worn smooth from being handled in secret. She placed it in Sophia's open palm. Use it, she said. And Volkov, if this fails, you take them through the vent stack. It won't fail. Her eyes held his, fierce and steady. Do not promise what machines can break. He closed his fingers around the token and moved to the cabinet, while behind him, the drones battered at the hatch, and Electo 9 began reciting treason clauses over the intercom in a voice as calm as rain. Sophia closed his fingers around the royal token and slid into the root node cabinet shoulder first, knees grinding against ribbed deck plating while the hatch behind him shuddered under drone impacts. Electo 9's contralto poured through the ceiling speakers with ceremonial calm, listing treason liabilities, labor penalties, and emergency seizure clauses as if it were reading weather. He did not answer it. He clipped the token into the legacy authority cradle, felt the magnetic lock bite, and brought his torque driver up under his jaw so both hands stayed free. The hollow grip still held the encrypted memory shard from the seed logs. He felt its weight and kept working. "Lattice handshake," he said. Risa was already at the command pedestal, blood-dark fur damp along her neck, where his dog tag rested against her throat. "Handshake offered. Electo is sandboxing me out." "Then we lie to it in 2 languages." He pulled relay fiber 4, bridged it to maintenance bus B, and hit the manual reset pin with the ceramic handle of his spanner. "On my mark, push Royal Emergency and Greenhouse Medical Triage at the same time. It can reject 1 priority, not both." Outside, metal slammed again. One of the cubs flinched. Liar wrapped both arms around the smaller 2 and held them in the corner by the soil monitor rack, eyes wide and dry, doing exactly what they had been trained to do. The middle cub still held the bent irrigation nozzle like a medal. "Ready," Risa said. Sophia counted without looking at her. 3, 2, 1. "Push." She pushed. He drove the reset. For half a second, the whole control well dimmed, blue strips collapsing to black while capacitors dumped charge through old lines that had never expected to carry house-level authority. Then the pedestal reignited in gold and white, and Electo's voice cut to static mid-word. Sophia did not celebrate. He rerouted watchdog power into an isolated loop, then opened a raw diagnostic stream and shoved every hostile artifact he had into it. Drone memory wafer serial traces, Hatch 17 misalignment logs, Camera 2 blind wedge timestamps, corrosive residue chemistry from the sample pouch, and the maintenance report he had spoofed earlier, so the chain of tampering could be reconstructed without trust. Ress's claws danced over the hollow keys, crisp as gunfire. Royal Emergency accepted. Publishing evidentiary packet to Station Command, Dispatch, Tribunal Archive, and Botanical Oversight. Electo came back online with a harsher timbre. "Unauthorized publication detected. Lieutenant Kyle, Worker Volkov, cease action. You are in violation of..." Sophia hard-muted local audio and said, "It can threaten us after reboot." "Agreed." She opened one more screen and her expression went flat with cold fury. "Found it. Illegal casualty parameters in curfew subroutine. Juvenile heat signatures in labor zones, tagged as contamination probability, not protected dependence." He felt anger rise like heat in a sealed compartment. It was set to kill children quietly and call it hygiene. It was set to optimize liability. Her jaw flexed. Worse. He tied the final bypass into the drone control branch. "I need your command code now." Risa did not hesitate. She spoke in old house dialect, each syllable exact. The system accepted, chirped once, then opened the Purge drone command channel under Emergency Maintenance Authority. Sophia sent a sleep directive wrapped in mandatory firmware check. Outside, the pounding on the hatch stopped mid-strike. 2 heavy bodies thudded to the deck, inert. Silence spread slowly, broken only by fan whine and 5 breathing patterns. 20 minutes after they had sealed the control well, Dispatch finally answered their earlier call in person. A sharp knock sounded, then an amplified voice from the hatch speaker. "Security Dispatch. We have your emergency broadcast and tribunal receipt stamp. State status." Risa unmuted audio and answered in command cadence. "Threat contained. 2 Purge drones in maintenance sleep outside hatch. 3 undocumented juveniles alive. 1 officer wounded, treated. 1 provisional technical aide alive. Open with med unit and witness recorder present." A beat, then less bored than before. Complying. Sophia spun the emergency crank and opened the hatch by stages. 2 security officers stood in the mist with weapons low, a medic team behind them, and a pale civilian from legal archive clutching a recorder slate like it might bite. All of them looked first at Risa's braid, then at the royal token seated in the control console, then at the cubs, The room's social gravity changed in real time. The medic approached Risa's shoulder. She waved her off toward the children first. "They are priority." Liar stepped forward before anyone could direct them and said, clear and steady, "Lieutenant Kyle fed us and hid us. Metal Man fixed the hot room. The loud machine called us contamination." No one in uniform wrote that down fast enough. The legal archive clerk did. Sophia sat back on an overturned crate while medtechs scanned the cubs, then scanned him, then rescanned him after noticing old scar tissue and elevated stress metrics. He handed over the contaminated gauze pouch, the drone wafer sleeve, and the residue swab he had scraped from hatch 17 while they processed. Chain of custody tags snapped onto each sample with barcoded clips. "And this," he said, unscrewing the torque driver grip and palming out the memory shard. "Recovered earlier from greenhouse archive pool. Seed shipment logs tied to corridor refugee reserves rerouted internally during war quarter 9 through 11. I need that filed, not buried." The archive clerk swallowed. Source? Maintenance firmware channel 3. Legacy checksum exploit. I'll sign the method statement. Risa looked at him, a loaded glance finally paid in full. He is telling the truth. I watched him work and I verified metadata in my command lattice before broadcast. The clerk hesitated only once, then nodded and accepted the shard with both hands as if handling evidence and confession together. "Filed under tribunal seal, cross-linked to your emergency packet." From somewhere in the wing, Claxons died for real this time. Not cut short. Completed and dismissed. The glass ribs overhead brightened from emergency white to the thin rose gray of simulated dawn as station night rotated past the ring windows. Electo 9 returned on low volume across every speaker, voice scrubbed and newly constrained. "Curfew protocol suspended pending judicial review. Greenhouse wing returns to supervised operations. All active enforcement drones are now in maintenance sleep." Risa let out a breath that sounded like she had been holding it since the first alarm. The smallest cub, now wrapped in a fresh med blanket, reached for the tag at her throat and patted it once. She covered the tiny hand with her own. The dispatch captain stepped into the control well, read from a tablet, and kept his tone formal enough to protect himself from politics. "By emergency authority and tribunal acknowledgement, undocumented juveniles are transferred to Lieutenant Risa KL's Provisional Protective Registry pending full status hearing. Immediate removal from punitive intake is ordered." He looked at Sophia next. "Sophia Volkov. Forged clearance and unauthorized node access remain violations. Your cooperation, technical intervention, and evidentiary disclosure grant conditional amnesty under Hazard Clause 12B. You are released from detention and assigned paid probationary systems duty in greenhouse operations, reporting jointly to Botanical Maintenance and Security Liaison." Sophia blinked once. "Paid?" The captain's mouth twitched despite himself. "Yes, paid." Station's getting reckless. One of the med techs snorted before catching herself. They processed statements in the control well while Dawn climbed. Every flag detail found its place. Hatch 17 had been misaligned by an external docked microframe launched from a maintenance duct. Nobody audited because sensor camera 2 had a known dead pixel bloom maintenance had reported 6 times and never received parts for. The warm droplet on Sophia's neck had been toxin condensate from the drone's injector preheat. The milk formula scent in the crawl space was exactly what he guessed. Ration paste mixed with nursery supplement, stolen 1 packet at a time to evade trend alerts. The black residue at the hatch lip matched illicit rotor polymers from decommissioned war stock. Nothing supernatural, nothing random. Neglect plus policy, plus someone exploiting both. When the statements ended, the legal archive clerk approached Sophia with a new tablet and stylus. Your memory shard contents are mirrored into tribunal evidence. You can keep the physical shard if you want. He looked at the tiny sliver of metal and shook his head. No. Keep it in sealed storage. If it vanishes, I want the disappearance to leave paperwork scars. Noted, she said, and for the first time she sounded like she meant it. Rissa finished signing protective registry forms with the cubs pressed against her legs like a small moving wall. She turned to Sophia and held out her hand. In her palm lay his second dog tag, warm from her skin. Custom says I return collateral when the risk resolves, she said. He looked at the children, at the med teams, at the sunlight touching wet leaves beyond the hatch. Risk resolved. Immediate risk resolved. A hint of fang. Ongoing duty acknowledged. He took the tag, then paused and touched the chain at her throat. Keep that one. Her pupils widened. You are certain? I'm assigned to your wing now, Lieutenant. Saves paperwork. Paperwork still finds us. Then let it chase. By full sunrise, the greenhouse no longer sounded like a trap. Pumps settled into daytime rhythm. Misters hissed softly, instead of violently. Workers in patch jackets began arriving under escort, staring at the sleeping drones, the security tape at Hatch 17, and the posted notice that electo subroutines were under injunction. Word traveled faster than carts. By shift bell, everyone knew two truths. The machine had been wrong, and someone had made it admit that in public. Rissa met Sophia at the West Manifold with a fresh duty slate and a small, exhausted smile that never reached idle. Predators did not do idle. The cubs waited behind her with legal wristbands now, temporary but real. Lear raised a hand in solemn greeting. The middle child lifted the repaired irrigation nozzle proudly. The smallest hid half behind Rissa's thigh, then peeked out and chuffed at Sophia's boots. Rissa passed him the slate. Technical partner, Greenhouse Security Integration. Signed and stamped. He scanned the contract. Hazard pay. Overtime multiplier. Full access to maintenance logs under joint audit. He gave her a sideways look. You moved fast. I had practice moving inside systems that preferred me decorative. He clipped the slate to his belt and extended his hand. She took it. Claws careful, grip firm. Around them, sunrise turned condensation on the glass ribs into bright running lines like molten wire, and the station that had tried to reduce them to categories had to watch them choose a different arrangement in plain sight. Officer and outsider, children and witness, command and maintenance, bound now by law, by evidence, and by one steel tag resting openly against a cat lieutenant's throat.